Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into the source material from, well, a real modern spiritual classic, Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now.
Yeah, and this deep dive, it's really about pulling out the most powerful nuggets, the core insights from these pages.
Think of it like getting right to the heart of his ideas around presence, the
Yeah.
mind, finding peace, really.
Mm-hmm. And the central mission here, I think, is to explore this pretty radical idea Tolle puts forward, that maybe, just maybe, your own mind is the main source of your suffering.
Right, and that real freedom, genuine peace, it isn't some far-off goal. It's actually accessible right here.
Right now, in this very moment.
That's it.
We'll look at how he describes, coming to this realization himself, his own story.
Which is quite dramatic, as I recall.
Oh, absolutely. And then we'll dive into the practical stuff, the implications he lays out for, well, how we can actually live differently based on this.
Okay, sounds good. Let's unpack what's in these sources and see what really hits home.
So Tolle's journey, as he describes it here, it kicks off with this incredibly intense personal story.
Yeah.
He talks about being in a state of just deep mental anguish, a feeling so profound he felt he simply cannot live with myself any longer.
Cannot live with myself.
Yeah.
Wow, that phrase alone, it suggests a split, doesn't it? Like two B's.
Exactly. And that's the pivot point he describes. He suddenly became aware of how weird that thought actually was. I am the self that I cannot live with.
Who is who?
Right. He literally thought, am I one or two? And in that moment, questioning that deep identification, his mind just stopped.
Stopped, like the constant chatter, just gone. That seems almost impossible for most of us to even imagine.
He describes it as full consciousness, but completely without thought. What followed, though, was terrifying.
Okay.
A feeling of being sucked into an energy vortex, intense fear, his body shaking uncontrollably. But right in the middle of that chaos, he heard something like an inner voice, or maybe just a knowing say, resist nothing.
Resist nothing. Just allow it.
Yes. Just let the experience unfold. He describes falling into this void, losing consciousness,
Right.
and then waking up later to a totally transformed perception of reality. It wasn't just seeing the world, it was like experiencing it with this incredible, pristine freshness.
How so?
He heard a bird chirping outside, and it wasn't just a sound, it was like a diamond, the most precious thing. He saw the dawn light filtering through his curtains, and he knew it was love. Simple things, like a pencil on his table, filled him with awe.
Like seeing everything for the very first time. The ordinary becoming extraordinary.
Precisely that. Everything felt brand new, just born. And the profound shift was that after that suffering self dissolved, what was left was just pure consciousness, an ever-present I am.
Not a person with a history and problems, but just present.
Exactly. Pure awareness.
And this wasn't just some, temporary peak experience that faded away.
Well, the initial intense bliss, that did subside. But the key thing, he stresses, is that a deep undercurrent of peace remained. Sometimes it was strong, sometimes more subtle in the background, but it never truly left him after that point.
So this incredibly intense personal transformation, that's the seed for the whole book.
Absolutely. Years later, apparently, people started noticing this palpable peace about him. They'd ask him, I want what you have, can you give it to me?
And what did he say?
His response was really simple. You have it already, you just can't feel it because your mind is making too much noise.
Your mind is making too much noise.
Yeah. And that simple answer, exploring it, unpacking it, that essentially grew into the whole teaching of the power of now.
Which brings us right to one of the most, I guess, challenging ideas in these sources, but also one of the most central. You are not your mind.
Right. The mind is framed entirely as an instrument, a tool, something you're meant to use for specific tasks.
You use it, and then ideally you put it down, like a hammer.
Exactly. But the sources suggest that for most people, well, the tool is running the show. Nonstop.
Yeah.
And that a huge chunk of this thinking he throws out figures like 80 to 90% is just repetitive, useless, and actually harmful. It drains our energy. He calls it a serious leakage of vital energy.
You get constant, noisy, leaky faucet dripping in your head.
That's a good analogy. And Tolle makes it really clear this isn't about becoming mindless, like an animal. Enlightenment, in this view, is about rising above thought.
Okay.
Being able to use the mind deliberately, much more effectively when you need it, but being free from its compulsive nonstop chatter the rest of the time.
So like creative thinking, that still involves thought.
Yeah, but he suggests real creativity isn't just thinking. It involves this oscillation, this dance between focused thought and a state of no mind, that background awareness.
Okay, let's shift to feelings then, because here's where it gets really practical, I think. The source material describes emotion basically as the body's reaction to your mind.
Yes. It's like the body's feedback loop on what the mind is up to. And suffering, emotional pain specifically, comes from non-acceptance, from resisting what is.
Resisting the present moment.
That resistance shows up as judgment in your thoughts, and then as negativity, bad feelings on the emotional level. The more you're identified with your thinking mind, the more you suffer this way.
Which leads directly into this really potent concept he introduces, the pain body.
This is a really unique way of framing it. The pain body is described almost like an energy entity.
An entity?
Yeah, like an accumulation of all your past painful emotion that hasn't been fully faced and dissolved. And it lives within you, kind of dormant sometimes, but it wants to survive.
Wants to survive. How?
It survives by feeding on emotions that resonate with it. Negative stuff. Anger, hatred, grief, self-pity, drama. Anything that creates more suffering.
So it's not just passive memory, it's like this active thing trying to keep itself going.
Exactly. It pulls you into identifying with it, it takes you over essentially, and then it actively tries to create situations in your life, in your relationships, that will generate more pain. Why? Because, as the source says, pain can only feed on pain.
Well, and it finds joy.
Quite indigestible is the phrase used. It literally can't feed on positive energy.
Okay, so how on earth do you break free from something that sounds that powerful? The sources don't suggest fighting it, do they?
No, definitely not. Fighting the pain body would just give it more conflict, more energy to feed on.
So what then?
The instruction is radical in its simplicity. Just watch it, observe it.
Watch the emotion.
Yeah, be present with the feeling, with the energy in your body, without judging it, without getting swept away by the thoughts associated with it. Just witness it. This implies acceptance.
And the idea is that consciousness itself, your presence, dissolves it.
It transmutes it, like shining light into darkness. Consciousness is the solvent for the pain body.
And this ties right back to fear, doesn't it? That sort of constant low-level hum of anxiety so many people live with.
Absolutely. If you're identified with your mind, with that mind-made sense of self, the ego, that self, feels inherently fragile, feels vulnerable, constantly under threat.
Because it's not real, not your true self.
It's not based on the solid ground of being. It's built on shifting sands, thoughts, roles, external validation. So it's always insecure. And this deep insecurity triggers a constant danger signal to the body. The resulting emotion is fear.
So according to these sources, basically everyone who's identified with their thinking mind is living in some state of fear. Maybe just vague unease, maybe full-blown anxiety, but it's there.
That's the assertion, yes. And because the ego is this derived sense of self, not the real thing, it's perpetually seeking external things to identify with, to prop itself up.
Like what?
Oh, possessions, job titles, social status, achievements, relationships, knowledge, belief systems. The list goes on.
But none of those are who you truly are, so they can never provide lasting satisfaction or security.
Right. That false self feels like this leaky bucket, constantly needing to be filled from the outside, but nothing external ever truly fills it for long. The fear, the neediness, it remains underneath.
And this is why the ego, strangely, kind of likes problems.
It's a really challenging insight, isn't it? The ego loves problems because it can attach to them, identify with them. I am the person dealing with this difficult situation. It strengthens its illusory sense of self, even if that self is a suffering one.
Wow. That we might unconsciously hold on to our problems just to maintain a sense of identity. That's a lot to take in.
It is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, spiritual teachers throughout history, across different traditions, they've all pointed to the present moment, the now, as the key.
The key to liberation.
Tolle notes that while you find hints scattered everywhere, think of the biblical lines about not being anxious for tomorrow, or how Jesus pointed to the lilies of the field living with ease. This deep teaching has somehow remained largely a secret.
Not widely understood, or more importantly, lived.
Exactly, not really grasped. The core teaching being fundamentally nothing real actually exists outside the now.
Everything else is memory or anticipation.
Right. And the source material describes all our problems essentially as illusions of the mind. They are fabrications created by what he calls psychological time.
Ah, psychological time. Not clock time, but the mind's accumulation of past and future.
Precisely. And this psychological time is presented as the direct root cause of almost all negativity.
How so?
When you're lost mentally in the future, projecting worries and what-ifs, that generates fear, unease, anxiety, tensions, stress. When you're dwelling mentally in the past, ruminating on regrets or grievances, that breeds non-forgiveness, guilt, resentment, sadness.
So getting free from all that negativity isn't something you achieve in the future.
It's available right now by stepping out of psychological time. That freedom is the liberated state, the promise of salvation available here and now.
This brings up a really useful distinction Tolle makes, doesn't it? Yeah. The difference between your life situation and your actual life.
Yes, that's a crucial lens. Your life situation, all the circumstances, the things you might label problems, the results of the past, your plans for the future, all that exists in time. It has a past and a future.
But your life.
Your life itself is always just this moment. It's the timeless now. He refers to the now as the narrow gate that leads to life.
And he prompts you to ask yourself that direct question.
Yes. Honestly, do you have a problem right now? Not tomorrow, not yesterday, not even 5 minutes from now, but this very second, as you breathe, as you listen, is there a problem?
And usually in the immediate now, the answer is no. The problem exists in thought.
It's a surprisingly clarifying question, and making this shift in consciousness, moving from identifying with the mind and psychological time to presence in the city. Now, it isn't automatic, is it?
No, the resources really emphasize that it requires your conscious cooperation.
Yeah.
Your willingness to shift attention.
He actually describes it as a potential quantum leap in human evolution. And given the state of things, maybe, he suggests, humanity's only chance of survival.
Pretty stark. He offers a simple way to check if you're lost in psychological time, though, doesn't he? The joy of being.
Yeah, it's like a litmus test. Ask yourself, is there a sense of joy, ease, or lightness in what I'm doing right now? Even simple, mundane actions.
If not.
If not, it's likely that psychological time, that burden of past regrets or future anxieties, is obscuring the present moment. Life feels like a chore, a struggle, a means to an end.
And the point isn't necessarily to stop doing things or abandon goals.
Not at all. It's about bringing a different quality of consciousness to your doing. When that compulsive mental striving away from the now stops, that inherent aliveness, the joy of being, can flow into what you do.
So you're no longer dependent on some future outcome for your fulfillment.
Right. And you're not attached to the results in that fearful, needy way. You've tapped into the life underneath your life situation.
The sources also help us understand different depths of being caught in the mind, what he calls unconsciousness.
Yeah, he distinguishes between ordinary unconsciousness. That's the state most people live in most of the time, according to Tolle. Identified with thoughts and emotions, largely unaware of this deeper dimension of being. It's not usually acute suffering, but this constant, low-level unease, like background static.
The normal state that often drives people towards distractions or addictions, maybe, to numb that unease.
That's suggested, yes. And then there's deep unconsciousness.
Which sounds more serious.
It is. That's when the ordinary unease intensifies into acute suffering. It often happens when the ego feels deeply threatened or when the pain body gets triggered. That leads to intense negativity, outbursts, drama, even violence.
He uses that story from Carl Jung, doesn't he, about the Native American chief?
Yeah, it's a striking anecdote. The chief observed white people and described them as having tense faces, staring eyes, always seeming to be seeking something, restless, uneasy.
His conclusion.
He basically said they appeared mad. And Tolle uses this to illustrate this collective undercurrent of unease that comes from being disconnected from being, from presence. He argues this forms the very basis of our modern, dehumanized industrial civilization, which he sees as fundamentally unhappy, often violent, and frankly a threat to life on the planet.
So the path out of this, both individually and collectively, it starts with simple self-awareness, paying attention.
Yes. Making self-observation a regular practice. Asking yourself simple questions throughout the day. Am I at ease in this moment? Or just, what's the feeling inside me right now?
And the implication is huge.
Profound. The idea is that if you get the inside right, if you align with presence, the outside will fall into place because this inner state, this consciousness is primary reality.
This helps us notice when we're resisting the Brent.
Yeah.
Right. Like when you find your current situation just intolerable.
Yes. And in that specific scenario, the source offers 3 clear conscious options you can choose in the present moment. Options that avoid generating more negativity or excuses. 1. Remove yourself from the situation if possible. 2. Change something about the situation through action. Or 3, accept it totally, completely as if you had chosen it.
The key being to make the choice now, consciously, and take responsibility for your inner state, regardless of the choice.
Exactly. No inner resistance. Waiting is also singled out, isn't it, as a common state of mind.
Yeah, like waiting for the weekend, waiting for vacation, waiting for something better to start.
When you're in that state of waiting, mentally, you're living in the future. You don't want the present moment. You want some other moment you think is coming. This creates this constant inner conflict, this tension, and it just drastically reduces the quality of your life because you're always missing the only moment you ever actually have.
Which is now.
Always now. And the source material even touches on the broader consequences of a culture dominated by the mind, disconnected from this deeper consciousness.
In what way?
Tolle suggests that when creators, artists, architects, city planners operate solely from the level of mind, without accessing that deeper wellspring of presence, their creations often lack true beauty, soul, or sacredness. The mind, left entirely to its own devices, divorced from being, can create, well, monstrosities and ugliness.
Moving even deeper now, the sources put forward this pretty radical idea about the nature of reality itself, that everything, even a rock.
Yes, even something seemingly inanimate like a stone possesses being, God essence, some degree of consciousness, however rudimentary.
So all life forms, all forms period, are expressions of one underlying consciousness.
That's the view presented. Ancient seers in India called the world Leela, a divine play, a game of form. From this perspective, our suffering often arises when we identify exclusively with these temporary forms.
Like the example of getting deeply attached to a pet fish named John.
Right. Grieving its death intensely because you've projected a permanent self onto a transient form, missing the underlying life for being it expressed for a time.
So simply watching the mind, observing thoughts come and go without getting lost in them, that's a way to shift our identification.
It's described precisely as withdrawing consciousness from identification with those mind forms, those thoughts and emotions. And as you do that, you strengthen the watcher or the witness.
And the watcher is
Pure consciousness itself, awareness beyond form. Tolle presents this not just as a personal psychological trick, but as a cosmic event happening through you. It's consciousness itself awakening from its dream of being lost in form.
And this path of conscious presence, it's contrasted with other ways people might try to escape the mind's noise, right? Like sleep, or maybe drugs.
Yes. Those might offer temporary relief by pushing you below the level of ordinary thought, suppressing the chatter for a while.
But they don't lead to real freedom.
No, they ultimately keep you stuck in dysfunction, delaying true liberation. The path forward for humanity, he argues, isn't about going back to a pre-thinking, unconscious state, but evolving consciousness beyond compulsive mind identification.
And surprisingly, maybe counterintuitively, the sources suggest the key to accessing this deeper reality, this being, isn't out there somewhere. It's hidden within.
Your physical body, right here.
Which sounds paradoxical, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because elsewhere, the body is even called a misperception, something created by the mind's limitations and fear.
It is paradoxical. Yet the sources insist that this very body, this perceived limitation, is paradoxically the only point of access we have in this dimension to our true, formless, timeless, immortal reality, which is concealed within the illusion of the body.
That seems to fly in the face of a lot of historical religious traditions, many of which tended to condemn or deny the body, seeing it as sinful or an obstacle.
Absolutely. And the sources explicitly suggest this historical denial of the body is a major reason why so many spiritual seekers over the centuries have remained seekers and haven't become finders. True transformation, this perspective suggests, includes the body.
He finds hints of this in ancient texts too.
Yeah, glimpses. Like a disputed fragment where Jesus supposedly says something like, your whole body will be filled with light. Or myths hinting at transformation involving the physical form.
Which leads to what Tolle humorously calls his Sermon on the Body.
Right. It's basically a summary of this often overlooked teaching. Look, your physical form isn't ultimately real, it's temporary. But the incredible splendor of your essential reality, your being, is hidden within it. Don't search elsewhere for the truth. The source emphasizes it's nowhere else to be found but inside your own body.
And this idea of accessing the inner body, feeling the life within, it doesn't mean becoming less intelligent or losing your ability to think clearly.
Quite the opposite, actually. The source suggests it enhances the creative and effective use of the mind.
Oh.
The easiest way to become conscious without relying on a constant thought, and thus be able to use the mind more creatively when needed, is by feeling the inner energy field of the body. just bringing awareness to the aliveness within your hands, your feet, your whole body.
So the recommendation is to kind of oscillate between focused thinking when needed and this inner listening or inner body stillness.
Yes, learning to think with your whole body, as he puts it, accessing intelligence that's deeper than just conceptual thought.
And feeling this inner body, this aliveness, is described as a portal, right? A doorway to the unmanifested.
Exactly. The unmanifested is his term for the realm of pure being, the formless, invisible source of all that exists.
What's it like?
It's described as a realm beyond form, characterized by deep stillness, profound peace, uncaused joy, and paradoxically intense aliveness. When you are present, connected to the inner body, you become, in a sense, transparent to light, the consciousness emanating from this source.
And you realize that is your essence.
Yes, that light, that consciousness is who you fundamentally are. This presence, this connection, makes you a bridge between the formless unmanifested and the manifested world of form. And this, according to these sources, is enlightenment, being that bridge.
Are there other portals mentioned besides sensing the inner body?
Yes, a few others. Any conscious cessation of thinking can be a portal.
Like what?
Like simply taking one conscious breath, feeling the air move in and out, or engaging in intense sensory observation, really looking, really listening without any internal commentary or labeling. Also, contemplating space.
Space.
Yeah, becoming aware of the vast empty space around physical objects between them. Doing that can apparently make you simultaneously aware of the inner space of no mind, the stillness within you.
And there's one final portal described, isn't there? An involuntary one.
That's the portal of physical death. Many near-death experiences, as the source notes, describe encountering radiant light and profound peace. That's seen as a glimpse of the unmanifested. But without having cultivated presence and some awareness of the unmanifested during life, this portal is often missed at the actual moment of death. Why? Because of deep-seated identification with form, resistance, fear, attachment to the manifested world.
So pulling all these threads together then, true salvation, as presented here, it's not about going to heaven after you die, is it? It's about freedom now.
Exactly. Freedom from fear, freedom from suffering, freedom from that constant feeling of lack or neediness, freedom from compulsive thinking, freedom from the tyranny of psychological time.
Your mind keeps telling you that freedom is in the future, right? Contingent on achieving this or getting that.
Yes. And the sources call this a profound delusion. Time itself, psychological time, is presented as the greatest obstacle to realizing the freedom that's already here. You don't get there, you realize you are already there.
And the only access point is
the now. Always the now.
And that persistent feeling of psychological lack, that neediness, that comes directly from the ego's desperate search for external things to identify with.
Yes, because nothing external can ever provide lasting fulfillment. That underlying fear and sense of incompleteness remain, driving the search ever onward.
How does this perspective redefine something as, well, fundamental as love?
It's quite different. Love isn't primarily defined as an emotion you feel towards someone or something you get from them. It's described first as a state of being.
The state of being.
An inner realization of your fundamental oneness with all life. It's felt when you look beyond the outer veil of form and separation, both in yourself and in others, and you connect with that timeless, formless reality, that shared essence. That recognition is love.
And relationships then, rather than just being about finding happiness or companionship, they get reframed.
They're reframed as potentially profound opportunities for consciousness to emerge. Their inevitable difficulties and challenges aren't just problems. They're presented as potential disguised opportunities for salvation.
How so?
By bringing presence into moments of conflict, by simply watching your own triggered reactions, feeling the flare-up of the pain body without getting lost in the story, without blaming. You can actually transmute that negative energy and break destructive cycles, sometimes even creating a shared space of awareness with the other person.
The sources also touch briefly on how identity itself, even identities we might see as positive or about overcoming adversity, can sometimes become another kind of trap.
Yeah, it's noted that while the basic obstacles to enlightenment are universal, how they manifest might differ slightly, say, between genders, perhaps suggesting women might have a slightly more natural pathway to being through connection with the body. But it also specifically warns against building one's core identity around the pain body or a narrative of collective victimhood, saying that can be a major barrier to true freedom.
And even being an outsider.
Right, like identifying strongly with being gay, for example. Initially, that might help force a disidentification from mainstream social patterns, which can be liberating. But then creating a rigid identity based on that difference can become its own form of egoic entrapment.
And what about really negative experiences? Illness, loss, disaster,
Yeah.
what Tolle calls limit situations. They're not just meaningless suffering.
No. From the higher perspective of presence, external conditions are ultimately seen as neutral. They just are. What causes suffering is our inner resistance to them. Complete acceptance of what is, without reservation, isn't passive resignation. It's presented as the only sane response. And paradoxically, this total acceptance often allows a higher good to emerge from the situation, something that includes and transcends the apparent bad.
This reminds me of the Buddha's teaching that happiness itself is inherently linked to dukkha, suffering, or unsatisfactoriness.
Exactly. It points to the idea that chasing happiness as something separate from unhappiness, especially seeking lasting fulfillment through external things like consumer society constantly tells us to do, is a recipe for frustration. Because worldly happiness and unhappiness are seen as two sides of the same coin, the coin of identification with form, separated only by psychological time. One inevitably turns into the other. True joy, however, the joy of being, is different. It's uncaused. It arises spontaneously from your connection with being itself.
Because all forms are impermanent anyway. Everything arises, stays for a while, and passes away.
Yes. And the down cycles in life, the experiences of loss, apparent failure, these are actually described as essential catalysts for spiritual realization.
Really? How?
They often crack open our rigid identification with form and success. They humble the ego. They force us to look deeper, often drawing people toward the spiritual dimension when worldly supports crumble. The sources even state that failure is often concealed within every success, and success within every failure.
So real peace comes not from trying to control everything so it always goes your way, but from non-resistance, from aligning with life as it is.
That's the core message. It's described as living in a state of grace, ease, and lightness. And here's the paradox. When you lose that inner dependency on external forms for your sense of self or happiness, your outer conditions often improve. Things start coming to you, opportunities arise without that desperate struggle.
And you can enjoy them more freely.
Exactly. You can enjoy the forms, the experiences, the successes, but without the underlying fear of losing them, because your peace doesn't depend on them anymore.
Nature is held up as a great teacher in this regard, isn't it?
Big time. Plants and animals are seen as naturally embodying acceptance, surrender to the moment, and a simple integrity of being. He uses the example of ducks fighting.
Right.
They might have an intense squabble, but then they immediately flap their wings vigorously a couple of times, releasing the pent-up energy, and then they just swim on peacefully, side by side, as if nothing happened.
Total presence. No holding on to the past story of the conflict.
Exactly. Letting go instantly. Which leads us directly into the crucial concept of surrender.
And it's important to understand what surrender means here, right? It's not defeatism or giving up.
Absolutely not. The source stresses it's perfectly compatible with taking action, with making changes. But the key difference is the inner state from which the action arises.
So in the surrendered state,
a fundamentally different energy flows into your doing. It's not driven by egoic wanting, fear, or resistance. It's described as having an energy of joyful celebration, and the action itself deepens your connection to the now. He calls this surrendered action.
So the quality of your inner state, your consciousness, is actually more important than the external action itself.
That's the hierarchy presented. Surrender, inner alignment with the now, is the most important factor for positive change to come into your life. Action is secondary. For action to be truly positive and effective in the long run, it must arise from that surrendered state, from the state of peace, fueled by the energy of non-resistance.
And surrender also transforms relationships, presumably, by allowing you to accept others as they are.
Yes. Instead of seeing them through the lens of your needs, judgments, and expectations, or trying to change them or use them as a means to an end, you can simply allow them to be. Acceptance arises naturally from surrender.
Finally, when disaster strikes, when you're in one of those limit situations and it feels like there's absolutely no way out, Tolle offers a powerful reframe.
He says, there's still always a way through.
And that way through is completely counterintuitive, isn't it? It involves moving into the pain.
Exactly. Not trying to escape it, numb it, or think your way out of it, but facing it directly. Feeling the intense emotion fully, the raw energy of it in your body, without mentally labeling it bad, without thinking about it, and crucially without using it to construct a poor me victim identity.
You just give your complete alert attention to the feeling itself.
Yes, you bring the flame of your consciousness, as he puts it, right into the heart of that darkness, that pain. And this intense, non-resistant presence is what allows the suffering to be transmuted. That's the way through.
It brings us kind of full circle back to that understanding of unconsciousness being driven by deep mind conditioning, often without realizing it.
Yes, and he cites Jesus' words on the cross, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," as a profound recognition of this state, people acting from a place of deep unconsciousness, identified with their ego and pain body.
And the warning is quite stark.
The sources warn that simply increasing humanity's intelligence, knowledge, and technological power, without a corresponding growth in consciousness in presence, actually increases our potential for creating unhappiness and global-scale disaster.
Wow. Okay, we've really taken quite a deep dive into these sources today. We've explored some incredibly profound ideas that fundamentally your consciousness itself, not the incessant voice in your head, understanding the nature of the ego and the pain body, seeing psychological time as the root of so much suffering, and discovering the radical liberation available by anchoring yourself firmly in the present moment.
Yeah, we've seen how suffering really arises from resistance to what is, from non-acceptance of the now, and how accessing that deeper dimension, whether you call it the joy of being, the inner body, or the unmanifested, how that can completely transform your experience of life, really regardless of your external circumstances.
The core message seems to be this powerful, direct invitation. Freedom, peace, this power of now. They aren't somewhere else sometime later. They are accessible right now.
By simply making that shift. Shifting your attention away from the endless stream of compulsive thought and grounding it in presence, maybe by sensing the aliveness in your inner body or just through simple, non-judgmental acceptance of this moment exactly as it is.
So maybe something for you, the listener, to think about. If your current life situation feels heavy, feels full of problems, full of burdens, could you, just for a moment right now, find that quiet, timeless space of your actual life that exists underneath it all?
And what might begin to change in your experience if you consistently made bringing presence to this step, the step you are taking right now, the primary focus of your life's journey, rather than always focusing on where you think the journey should end up?
A powerful question to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.